The blood on Catherine's hands wasn't hers, and the cow's labored breathing filled the barn like a death rattle that wouldn't stop. She had been crouched in the hay for 3 hours now, her skirt soaked through with fluids and sweat, her arms aching from reaching inside the heaving animal, feeling for the calf that simply would not turn. The moon hung high over Casa Grande, Arizona, casting silver light through the barn's broken slats, and Katherine Ramsey knew with terrible certainty that without help, she would lose them both before dawn. She was 22 years old and had been running this ranch alone for 8 months, ever since her father died of pneumonia that previous winter. The year was 1883, and women who managed cattle operations without a husband were rare enough to draw whispers in town, but Catherine had inherited her father's stubbornness along with his land. She knew cattle, knew horses, knew how to mend fences and balance ledgers, and shoot straight when coyotes came too close to the herd. But this breech birth was beyond her skill, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, across desert that turned treacherous in the dark. The cow, a prize Hereford named Daisy that her father had paid good money for 2 years ago, let out a long, agonized moan. Catherine felt tears of frustration burn her eyes as she withdrew her arm again, the calf's hooves where its head should be, lodged tight. She had tried everything she knew, every technique her father had shown her, but the calf wouldn't budge. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was praying or just talking to the cow. "Please just hold on." The sound of hoofbeats outside made her head snap up. For a moment, fear seized her, because riders at midnight could mean rustlers or worse, and she was alone on this property with only her father's old rifle leaning against the barn wall, 15 feet away. But then a voice called out, deep and cautious. "Hello, the barn! Saw your lights burning. Everything all right?" Catherine's breath caught. She knew that voice, though she had only heard it a handful of times. Isaiah Vaughn, the cowboy who worked the massive Triple Creek ranch that sprawled across the territory north of her property. She had seen him in town occasionally, a tall man with sun-darkened skin and careful eyes who always tipped his hat politely, but never lingered to talk. He was maybe 25 or 26, quiet in the way of men who had seen hard things and learned to hold their words close. "In here," she called back, her voice hoarse. "I need help." She heard him dismount, the creak of leather and jingle of spurs, and then he was in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight. He was taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered under a dusty canvas coat, his hat shadowing his face. He took in the scene quickly, his gaze moving from her blood-stained arms to the struggling cow to the desperation that must have been written all over her face. "Breach?" he asked, already moving forward, already shrugging out of his coat. "Yes," Catherine said, relief flooding through her so strongly her knees felt weak. "The calf won't turn. I've been trying for hours." Isaiah knelt beside her in the hay, rolling up his sleeves to reveal strong, scarred forearms. He didn't ask permission, just reached out and laid a careful hand on the cow's flank, feeling the contractions, assessing. His hands were large and capable, with long fingers and calluses in all the places that came from hard work with rope and leather. "How long has she been laboring?" His voice was calm, focused, and Catherine found herself steadying just from the sound of it. "Since sunset, about 6 hours total." He nodded, his jaw tight. "We don't have much time. She's getting weak." He met Catherine's eyes then, and she saw something in his gaze that made her trust him instantly. There was competence there and determination, but also kindness. "I'm going to try to turn the calf. It's going to be rough, and I'll need you to help hold her steady and watch for signs she's giving up. Can you do that?" "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. Isaiah moved to the cow's rear, speaking to the animal in a low, soothing murmur as he carefully began to examine the situation. Catherine positioned herself near Daisy's head, stroking the cow's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the sweat-soaked hide. The barn smelled of hay and blood and fear, and the lantern light flickered with every gust of wind that found its way through the walls. "There you are." Isaiah murmured, and Catherine couldn't tell if he was talking to the cow or the calf. His face was a mask of concentration, his entire focus narrowed to the work before him. She watched the muscles in his arms flex as he worked, saw the careful precision in every movement. He wasn't rushing, wasn't forcing. He was patient and gentle, even in his strength. Minutes stretched into an hour. Isaiah worked steadily, his shirt soaked through with effort despite the cool desert night. Once, he had to stop and rest his arms, flexing his fingers to work out the cramps, and Catherine handed him the canteen she kept hanging on a nail. He drank deeply, water running down his chin, and when he handed it back, their fingers brushed. Even in the midst of crisis, she felt that small touch like a spark. "You've been managing this place alone?" he asked during that brief rest, and she nodded. "Since my father passed." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, which she would have hated, but respect. "That's not easy work for one person." "No," she agreed, "but it's my land, my responsibility." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned back to the cow. "Then let's make sure you don't lose this calf." He worked for another hour, and Catherine watched dawn begin to creep across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, and her muscles ached from holding position, from tension, from fear. But Isaiah never wavered. His focus never broke. He was patient in a way that spoke of deep experience, moving with the cow's contractions instead of against them, coaxing rather than forcing. "Got one leg," he said finally, triumph barely contained in his voice. "Now the other! Come on, little one." Catherine held her breath. Daisy let out a low, exhausted groan, and then Isaiah was moving faster, pulling carefully, steadily. Catherine saw the calf's hooves appear, then legs, and then in a rush of fluid and membrane, the head. "She's coming," Isaiah said, and there was something almost joyful in his voice now. "Come on, Mama, one more push." The calf slid free into Isaiah's waiting arms, a wet, gangly creature that looked impossibly fragile. For one terrible moment, it didn't move, didn't breathe, and Catherine's heart clenched. But then Isaiah was clearing its nose and mouth with quick, efficient movements, rubbing it vigorously with hay, and suddenly the calf sputtered and gasped and let out a thin, wavering cry. Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Isaiah was grinning now, his face transformed by that smile, years falling away from him. He looked young and alive and absolutely beautiful in the dawn light, holding new life in his arms. "You did it," Catherine breathed. "We did it," he corrected, settling the calf down where its mother could reach it. Daisy, exhausted but alert, immediately began licking her baby with long, devoted strokes of her tongue. They sat there in the hay together, watching the miracle of a mother meeting her child, and Catherine became aware of how close Isaiah was sitting to her. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell horse and leather and honest sweat. When she looked at him, he was already looking at her, and the expression in his eyes made something flip over in her chest. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt completely inadequate for what he had done, for what he had saved. "You were doing good work when I got here," he said quietly. "You kept her calm, kept trying. That matters. But I couldn't have finished it without you." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe we all need help sometimes. That's not weakness." The sun was fully up now, streaming through the barn, and Catherine became aware of how she must look, covered in blood and birth fluids, her hair falling loose from its pins, her dress ruined. But when Isaiah looked at her, she didn't see disgust or judgment in his eyes. She saw something else entirely, something that made warmth bloom in her chest despite her exhaustion. "Can I make you breakfast?" she asked impulsively. "It's the least I can do." He hesitated, and she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. "I'd like that." They left Daisy and her calf settling in together, the the cow already nuzzling her baby with obvious devotion, and walked through the early morning to Catherine's house. It was a simple adobe structure that her father had built 20 years ago, thick-walled against the summer heat and winter cold, with a wide porch and shuttered windows. Catherine suddenly saw it through a stranger's eyes and felt self-conscious about the peeling paint, the broken board on the second step that she kept meaning to fix. But Isaiah didn't seem to notice any of that. He waited on the porch while she went inside to light the stove and put coffee on to boil. Then she called him in to wash up at the basin. They stood side by side at her kitchen pump, scrubbing blood and fluids from their arms, and the domesticity of it felt strange and intimate all at once. Catherine cooked eggs and bacon, sliced bread from the loaf she had baked 2 days ago, and they sat at her small kitchen table as the house filled with the smell of coffee and food. Isaiah ate like a man who had worked hard and earned his hunger, but he had good manners, wiping his mouth with the cloth napkin she provided and thanking her after every serving. "You're a good cook," he said, and she laughed. "I'm a practical cook. There's a difference. Practical is good. Practical keeps you alive out here." She studied him across the table, taking in details she had been too focused to notice in the barn. He had a strong face, all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, but his eyes were gentle. There was a scar through his left eyebrow that gave him a slightly dangerous look, but when he smiled, it softened everything. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and curled slightly where it touched his collar. He needed a shave, but Catherine found she liked the rough shadow along his jaw. "What were you doing riding past my property at midnight?" she asked, curious. He looked slightly embarrassed. "We had some cattle wander off yesterday evening. I was tracking them, saw your barn lit up like a beacon. Figured either you were in trouble or working late, and either way, it wouldn't hurt to check." "Did you find your cattle?" "Not yet, but I'll pick up their trail after breakfast." Catherine felt a pang of guilt. "I kept you from your work." "You didn't keep me from anything," he said firmly. "That cow and her calf needed help. The cattle can wait another hour." They finished eating in comfortable silence, and then Catherine walked him back to his horse, a solid bay gelding with intelligent eyes who nuzzled Isaiah's shoulder affectionately. The morning was warming quickly, the way it always did in Arizona, the sky that brilliant, endless blue that she had loved her whole life. Isaiah swung into the saddle with easy grace, settling his hat on his head, and looked down at her. "You need anything else before I go? Any other animals giving you trouble?" Catherine shook her head, smiling. "I think we're good for now. But thank you. Truly." He nodded, then hesitated, his hands resting on his saddle horn. "Miss Ramsey, I know this isn't proper, me saying this when we barely know each other, but if you ever need help with the ranch, with anything, my boss wouldn't mind me riding over on my off days. I'm not trying to suggest you can't handle things, but ranching is hard work for two people, let alone one." Catherine felt her heart speed up. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Vaughn." "Isaiah," he corrected. "Hey, please." "Isaiah," she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. "I'm Catherine." He smiled at her, that transformative smile that made him handsome, and tipped his hat. "I'll be seeing you, Catherine." She watched him ride away across the desert, was sitting tall in the saddle, and didn't go back inside until he was just a speck in the distance. The house felt emptier without him in it, which was ridiculous because he had only been there for an hour. But she couldn't stop thinking about his hands, so careful and competent with the calf. Couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her in the barn, like she was something worth seeing. The next week passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Catherine checked on Daisy and her calf, who was thriving, a spirited little heifer who kicked up her heels and explored every corner of the paddock. She mended fences, cleaned the water troughs, rode out to check on her small herd. But every evening, as the sun set and the desert cooled, she found herself looking toward the northern horizon, wondering if she would see a rider approaching. It was 8 days after the calf's birth when Isaiah came back. Catherine was in the corral working with one of her young horses, trying to get him comfortable with a saddle blanket when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up, her heart jumping, and there he was, riding that same bay gelding, a coil of rope over his shoulder and his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. "Afternoon," he called as he approached, and Catherine felt a smile spread across her face before she could stop it. "Afternoon yourself." He dismounted, tied his horse to the fence rail, and leaned against the corral to watch her work. Catherine tried not to be self-conscious about his scrutiny, but she was aware of every movement she made, every command she gave the horse. The young gelding was skittish, dancing away from the blanket, and she had to be patient, had to move slowly and speak softly. "You're good with him," Isaiah observed after a while. "Not many people have that kind of patience. My father taught me that horses remember everything. If you scare them, they never really trust you again." "Smart man, your father." Catherine finally got the blanket settled on the horse's back, rewarded him with a pat and some grain, and climbed out of the corral. Isaiah handed her the canteen from his saddle without being asked, and she drank gratefully, aware of the dust on her face and the sweat staining her shirt. "I brought something," Isaiah said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle and handed it to her. "Thought you might like it." Catherine unwrapped the cloth to find a beautiful piece of worked leather, a strap with an intricate pattern tooled into it. It took her a moment to realize what it was. A bridle strap? For that young horse. Looks like he's about ready to start real training, and I noticed your tack is getting worn. This is good leather, ought to last you years. Catherine ran her fingers over the tooling, touched beyond words. This wasn't a quick purchase from the general store. Someone had spent hours making this, getting every detail right. "Did you make this?" He looked embarrassed again, that same expression she had seen at her kitchen table. "I work leather in the evening sometimes. Helps me think." "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "But you shouldn't have. This must have taken so much time." "I wanted to," he said simply. "Besides, I owed you breakfast." She laughed. "You owed me nothing. You saved my cow and her calf." They stood there smiling at each other, and Catherine felt something shift between them, something warm and promising. Isaiah cleared his throat, looking almost nervous, which was charming on a man who had shown such absolute confidence during the difficult birth. "I was wondering," he said, "if you might like some help with that horse training. I've got the afternoon free, and I'm pretty good with green horses." "I'd like that very much," Catherine said. They spent the next 3 hours working together, and Catherine was struck by how easily they moved around each other, how naturally they communicated. Isaiah had a way with horses that was similar to hers, based on patience and respect rather than dominance. He showed her a technique for getting the horse comfortable with weight on his back, moving slowly from a blanket to a saddle to eventually a person, and the young gelding responded beautifully. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Isaiah helped her settle the horses for the night. They walked together to the pump, washing dust and sweat from their hands and faces, and Catherine felt content in a way she hadn't in months. It wasn't just the help with the work, though that was wonderful. It was the company, the conversation, the way Isaiah looked at her like she was capable and interesting and worth his time. "Stay for supper," she said impulsively. "I made stew yesterday, and there's plenty." He hesitated, and she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. "I'd like that." They ate on her porch as the stars came out, the desert cooling around them, and talked about everything and nothing. Isaiah told her about growing up in Texas, about coming to Arizona 5 years ago looking for work. He talked about the Triple Creek Ranch, about his boss who was fair but demanding, about the other cowboys he worked with. Catherine told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was 10, about learning to rope and ride alongside her father. "Don't you get lonely out here?" Isaiah asked as the moon rose, full and bright. Catherine considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but I love this land. I love the work. And being lonely is better than being somewhere I don't want to be, doing something I don't care about. I understand that, he said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the coyotes sing in the distance, and then Isaiah stood, reaching for his hat. I should get back. Early morning tomorrow. Catherine walked him to his horse, reluctant to see him go. He swung into the saddle, then looked down at her, his face half in shadow. Can I come back? He asked. Not to help, necessarily, just to see you. Catherine felt warmth bloom in her chest. I'd like that. He smiled, touched the brim of his hat, and rode off into the moonlight. After that, Isaiah came by every few days. Sometimes he helped with ranch work, sometimes they just sat and talked, and sometimes they rode out together across the desert, exploring the wild country that surrounded her property. Catherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and scared her. She had never felt this way about anyone, this constant awareness of another person, this desire to share every small moment of her day with someone. One evening, 3 weeks after that first night in the barn, they were sitting on her porch watching the sunset when Isaiah reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond brief, accidental contact, and Catherine felt the warmth of his palm against hers like a brand. She looked at him, and he was already looking at her, his expression serious. Catherine, he said, and her name in his deep voice made her shiver. I need to tell you something. Her heart sped up, but she kept her voice steady. All right. I haven't been fully honest with you. He paused, his thumb rubbing small circles on the back of her hand. When I said I was riding past your property that night looking for cattle, that was true. But I'd ridden past your property before, several times. I'd seen you in town, seen you working your ranch, and I wanted to meet you, but I didn't know how. A man doesn't just ride up to a woman's property without a reason. So when I saw your barn lit up that night, I was grateful for the excuse. Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. You wanted to meet me? From the first time I saw you, he said simply. You were in town buying supplies, arguing with the clerk about the price of nails. You were fierce and beautiful, and you didn't back down, and I thought, that's a woman worth knowing. But I'm just a cowboy with nothing much to offer, and you're a landowner, and I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me. Isaiah, Catherine said, turning to face him fully, I own 200 acres and maybe 30 head of cattle. I'm not some rich rancher. I work hard for everything I have. You own land, he said. That's more than most people ever get. That's something real and permanent. And you think that makes you not good enough? She felt a flash of anger on his behalf. You saved my cow and her calf. You've helped me with my horses, fixed my fences, made me laugh for the first time in months. You're kind and skilled and decent. Why would I think you weren't good enough? He looked at her with such hope and vulnerability that her breath caught. Catherine, I'm saying this all wrong. What I'm trying to tell you is that I care about you. More than care, I think about you all the time. When I'm working, when I'm eating, when I'm trying to sleep. You're always there in my mind. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like permission to court you properly. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. She squeezed his hand, moved closer to him on the porch bench. Isaiah, I've been hoping you'd say something like this for weeks. Yes, you can court me. You already have been, really. His smile was brilliant, and then he was leaning in, and Catherine met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, his lips soft against hers. But then Catherine made a small sound and reached up to touch his face, and the kiss deepened, became something more urgent and real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to do this right, he said. I'm going to save money, get my own place someday. I want to be able to offer you a real future. I don't need grand gestures, Catherine said. I just need you. They sat on that porch until the stars came out, holding hands and stealing kisses, and Catherine felt happier than she could remember being since before her father died. Isaiah stayed late that night, reluctant to leave, and when he finally rode away, Catherine stood on her porch watching until he disappeared into the darkness. The next months were some of the best of Catherine's life. Isaiah came by as often as his work allowed, and they fell into an easy rhythm together. He helped her with the heavy ranch work, taught her tricks he had learned over years of cowboying, and Catherine taught him her father's methods of breeding and training horses. They rode out together on Sundays, exploring the arroyos and canyons around her property, and Isaiah showed her places he had discovered in his years working the territory. The townspeople of Casa Grande noticed, of course. Catherine became aware of the looks she got when she went into town, the whispers. Some of them were kindly, women smiling at her and asking after her cowboy. Others were less kind, men who thought she should sell her land and find a proper husband who could take care of her, not a drifting ranch hand with no prospects. But Catherine held her head high and ignored them. Isaiah was worth 10 of those men who judged without knowing. In late summer, 4 months after that first night, Isaiah rode up to her house leading a second horse, a pretty sorrel mare with a white blaze. Catherine came out to meet him, curious, and he dismounted with a grin. I want to show you something, he said. Dress for riding and pack for 2 days. Catherine raised an eyebrow. That's mysterious. It's a surprise. Trust me? She did trust him completely, so she packed a bedroll and supplies while Isaiah tended the horses. They rode out heading north, into territory Catherine didn't know well, and as the sun climbed higher, Isaiah told her stories about the land they passed through, about the Apache who had lived here before being forced onto reservations, about the Spanish explorers who had passed through centuries ago. They rode through the heat of the day and into the evening, and just as Catherine was about to ask where they were going, they crested a rise, and she saw it. A small valley nestled between red rock cliffs, with a spring feeding a pool of clear water and cottonwood trees providing shade. It was beautiful, a hidden oasis in the middle of the harsh desert. What is this place? Catherine asked. Awed. Triple Creek Rangeland, Isaiah said. But it's on the far edge of the property and nobody uses it. I found it my first year working for Mr. Harrison, and I've been coming here ever since when I need to think. They made camp under the cottonwoods, and as the sun set, Isaiah built a fire and cooked bacon and beans in a skillet. They ate watching the stars come out, so many more visible here, away from any town lights, and Catherine felt a peace settle over her that was profound and complete. I wanted to bring you here, Isaiah said, as they sat by the fire later, because this place is important to me, and you're important to me. I wanted to share it with you. Catherine moved closer to him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She fit there perfectly, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder, his warmth surrounding her. They sat like that for a long time, just being together, and Catherine thought about how much her life had changed in 4 short months. She had gone from being alone and struggling to having this, having Isaiah, having hope for a future she hadn't dared imagine. Isaiah, she said softly, do you ever think about the future? About what you want your life to look like? She felt him tense slightly, then relax. All the time lately. I think about having my own land someday. Not a big spread, just enough for some cattle and horses. A house with a real porch and a barn that doesn't leak. Maybe a family, if I'm lucky enough to find a woman who'd want that with me. Catherine's heart was pounding. Have you found her? He pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes serious in the firelight. I hope so. Catherine, I know it's only been a few months, and I know I should wait longer before saying this, but I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you laugh when I tell bad jokes. I love watching you work with your horses, and the way you argue about politics, and the fact that you can outride most men I know. I love everything about you, and I want a future with you, if you'll have me." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I've loved you since that night in the barn, I think, when you were so gentle with Daisy, so patient, when you smiled at me like I had done something amazing instead of just standing there watching you work. I love you, Isaiah." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Catherine kissed him back with everything she had. They pulled apart eventually, breathless, and Isaiah's hands were shaking as he brushed tears from her cheeks. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know I should wait, should save more money, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. Katherine Ramsey, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They held each other under the stars, making plans and dreaming out loud. Isaiah told her he had been saving money, that he had almost enough for a down payment on a small property. Catherine told him she didn't care about the size of the property, that her land was enough for both of them if he wanted to live there. They talked about combining their herds, about breeding horses, about building a future together. That night they slept under the stars with their bedrolls pushed close together, and Catherine felt safer and more content than she ever had. When she woke in the early dawn, Isaiah was already up, making coffee over the revived fire, and he smiled at her with such love that her heart ached with happiness. They spent that day exploring the valley, swimming in the spring-fed pool, lying in the grass and talking about everything and nothing. It was one of those perfect days that Catherine knew she would remember forever. Every detail crystallized in amber, the way the sun shone through the cottonwood leaves, the sound of Isaiah's laugh when she splashed him in the pool, the taste of the coffee he made, strong and bitter and perfect, the feel of his hand in hers as they walked along the creek. They rode back to her ranch the next day, and reality set in quickly. Isaiah had to return to work at the Triple Creek, and Catherine had her own responsibilities. But everything felt different now, brighter and more full of promise. They were engaged. They were going to build a life together. Isaiah spoke to his boss, Mr. Harrison, the following week. He came back to Catherine's place that evening with news. Mr. Harrison had been pleased for him, had offered to let Isaiah keep working at Triple Creek until he found his own place, and had even suggested some smaller properties that might be coming up for sale. But the more Isaiah and Catherine talked, the more it made sense for Isaiah to move to her ranch. Her property was paid for, established, and while it was small, it was enough to support them both if they worked hard and managed carefully. "Are you sure?" Isaiah asked, sitting at her kitchen table that evening. "I don't want you to think I'm after your land. I want us to be partners in this, equal." "We will be partners," Catherine said firmly. "This land was my father's, but it's mine now, and soon it will be ours. Your cattle, your skills, your knowledge, all of that makes us stronger together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Combining what we have to build something better." He looked at her with such love and respect that she felt it like a physical touch. "How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one," she said, coming around the table to kiss him. They decided to marry in the fall, after the worst of the summer heat had passed and before the winter cold set in. Catherine made the trip into Casa Grande to tell the minister and to buy fabric for a dress. The women in town were curious and mostly kind, though there were a few who made snide comments about her marrying a cowboy with no property of his own. Catherine ignored them, holding her head high. Isaiah gave his notice at Triple Creek, and Mr. Harrison gave him a generous bonus and a good horse as a wedding gift. Isaiah brought his few possessions to Catherine's ranch in late September, and they spent his last weeks as a single man preparing for winter, storing hay and grain, checking fences and water sources. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and Catherine had never been happier or more exhausted. The wedding was small, held in the church in Casa Grande on a perfect October morning when the heat had finally broken and the air held the promise of cooler weather. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from soft blue fabric that brought out her eyes, and she had flowers in her hair that Isaiah had picked that morning from the wild blooms that grew near her creek. Isaiah wore a new shirt and his best pants, his boots polished and his hair neatly trimmed, and when Catherine walked down the aisle and saw his face, she knew she had made the right choice. They spoke their vows before God and the small gathering of townspeople who had come, and when the minister said Isaiah could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, reverently, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious. Catherine heard a few women sniffle, and she blinked back her own tears, too happy for words. They had a small celebration at the hotel in town, with food and music, and then they rode back to their ranch as the sun set. Their ranch. Not hers, not his, but theirs. Isaiah carried her over the threshold of the adobe house, both of them laughing, and that night they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their bedroom, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words of love. The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was good. They worked hard, waking before dawn and collapsing into bed after dark, but they worked together. Isaiah proved to be a good manager, with ideas for improving the herd and maximizing their grazing land. Catherine's horse training brought in extra income, and Isaiah started doing custom saddle and tack work in the evenings, his leather working skills creating beautiful, functional pieces that people were willing to pay well for. They had disagreements, of course. Catherine had been independent for so long that sometimes she chafed at having to consider another person's opinions, and Isaiah had his own stubborn streak. But they learned to talk things through, to compromise, to respect each other's knowledge and experience. And the making up after arguments was always sweet, passionate kisses and whispered apologies, and falling into each other's arms. In the spring of their first year of marriage, Daisy's heifer calf, the one Isaiah had saved that first night, was old enough to breed. They paired her with a good bull from a neighboring ranch, and Catherine felt a symmetry to it. This animal that had almost died before Isaiah came into her life, now beginning her own journey toward motherhood. That summer was brutally hot, even for Arizona, and they struggled to keep the water troughs filled as the creek ran lower than Catherine had ever seen it. But they survived. And when the monsoon rains finally came in August, they stood on their porch watching the lightning and breathing in the smell of wet earth, grateful for the relief. In the fall, Catherine realized her monthly courses hadn't come in 2 months. She told Isaiah one evening as they were doing the dishes together, and he dropped the plate he was holding, staring at her with wide eyes. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," she said, feeling nervous and excited and terrified all at once. He crossed to her in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She felt him shaking and realized he was crying, and that made her cry too, happy tears soaking into his shirt. "We're going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to have a baby," she agreed. The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine had morning sickness for the first 4 months, and the summer heat of her second trimester was miserable. But Isaiah was attentive and caring, taking on more of the physical work and making sure she rested. He worried constantly, and Catherine finally had to tell him that she was not made of glass, that pregnant women had been ranching since ranches existed. "I know," he said, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "But you're my wife, and that's my child. I'm allowed to worry." She softened at that, taking his hand. "I know. But we're both going to be fine." Their son was born in March of 1885, on a cool morning when the desert was blooming with wildflowers. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Isaiah, waiting anxiously outside the bedroom while the midwife worked, thought he might go mad with fear. But then he heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, and the midwife called him in. Catherine was exhausted, her hair soaked with sweat and her face pale, but she was smiling as she held their son. Isaiah knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny red face, the small fists waving in the air, and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He is," Catherine agreed. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, arguing good-naturedly about various options. But looking at his son, Isaiah knew. John, after your father. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Really? He would have wanted to meet his grandson. This way, he's part of our family. They named him John Isaiah Vaughn, and he was a healthy, vocal baby who kept them up half the night and filled their days with joy and exhaustion. Isaiah proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice to get John to sleep. The ranch thrived with their combined efforts and careful management. They slowly built up their herd, invested in good breeding stock, and gained a reputation for quality cattle and horses. Isaiah's leather work brought in steady additional income, and Catherine found she could balance motherhood with ranch work, carrying John in a sling as she did lighter chores and leaving him with Isaiah when she needed to ride out. When John was 2, Catherine got pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a daughter on a warm November afternoon with much less difficulty than John's birth. They named her Emma Rose, and she had her mother's features and her father's dark hair. Isaiah held his daughter with the same awe he had felt with John, marveling at how small and perfect she was. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, hard times and good times flowing into each other. They had dry years when they worried about water and struggled to keep the cattle fed. They had wet years when the grass grew thick and the herd prospered. Isaiah built additions onto the house, a nursery for the children, and eventually a second bedroom when they got too old to share. He fixed the barn roof and built a proper chicken coop and constructed a workshop where he could do his leather crafting. Catherine taught both children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and by the time John was 6 and Emma 4, they were both competent riders who helped with simple ranch chores. The children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of a job well done. The years passed, and Isaiah and Catherine's love deepened and matured. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses. They had weathered hardships together, celebrated triumphs together, raised children together. They still stole kisses in the barn when they thought the children weren't looking, still made love in their bedroom with quiet passion, still sat on their porch in the evenings holding hands and watching the sunset. On their 10th anniversary, Isaiah had a surprise for Catherine. He rode her out to that hidden valley where he had proposed, and she saw that he had built something there, a small cabin, rustic but sturdy, with a porch facing the spring and the cottonwood trees. "What is this?" Catherine asked, amazed. "I've been working on it for a year," Isaiah said. "Coming out on Sundays when you thought I was checking fence lines. I wanted us to have a place that was just ours, where we could come sometimes to remember what it was like before children and responsibilities, where we could just be Isaiah and Catherine, not Mama and Papa." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face as she explored the cabin. It was simple but perfect, with a bed and a small stove and windows that looked out over the valley. Isaiah had even carved their initials into the doorframe with the date of their wedding. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace him. "Thank you." They spent that night in the cabin, just the two of them, and it was like being newly married again. They made love slowly, tenderly, relearning each other without the hurry of children who might wake or chores that needed doing. They talked until dawn about their dreams and fears, their hopes for their children's futures, their gratitude for the life they had built together. As the years continued to pass, their ranch became one of the most respected operations in the territory. They were known for fair dealing, quality livestock, and generosity to neighbors who fell on hard times. Isaiah served on the local cattle association board, and Catherine was respected as one of the few female ranchers who had not only survived, but thrived. John grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Emma was spirited and adventurous, more interested in training horses than managing cattle, but equally devoted to the ranch. Isaiah and Catherine watched their children grow with pride and occasional sadness at how quickly time passed. When Catherine was 38 and Isaiah 41, she discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, both of them thinking their family was complete, but the baby boy they had the following spring was a joy. They named him Samuel Thomas, and his older siblings doted on him. Sam, as they called him, was a happy, easy baby who grew into a cheerful boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. The children eventually grew up and made their own choices. John married a girl from town and built a house on the far end of their property, starting his own herd but remaining close to family. Emma, independent like her mother, started a horse training business that brought clients from across the territory. Sam, the baby, showed signs of wanting to be a veterinarian, interested in healing animals rather than just raising them. Isaiah and Catherine grew old together, their faces lined by sun and wind and time, their hands weathered from decades of hard work. But they still held those hands as they sat on their porch in the evenings, still looked at each other with love and desire, still thanked God for the night that had brought them together. One evening, when Isaiah was 58 and Catherine 55, they rode out to their cabin in the valley. They didn't get out there as often anymore, their bones protesting long rides more than they used to, but it was still their special place. They sat on the porch as the sun set, and Isaiah had his arm around Catherine's shoulders, her head resting against him in that familiar, perfect way. "Do you remember that first night?" Catherine asked. "In the barn with Daisy?" "Every detail," Isaiah said. "I was so nervous. I wanted to help, but I was terrified I'd fail and lose both the cow and the calf, and then you'd never want to see me again." Catherine laughed. "I was terrified too. I thought I was going to lose them, lose everything. And then you rode up like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even finished praying." "I was praying that night too," Isaiah admitted, "asking God to let me save them and to give me the courage to tell you how I felt about you." "He answered both prayers," Catherine said softly. Isaiah kissed the top of her head. "Best night of my life, even though I spent it arm deep in a birthing cow." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the desert, the chorus of frogs from the spring, the call of a nighthawk hunting insects in the dusk. "I love you," Catherine said. "I've loved you for 25 years, and I'll love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," Isaiah said. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we built, our children, everything good in my world started that night when I saw your barn lit up and decided to stop." "I'm glad you stopped," Catherine said. "So am I," Isaiah replied. They stayed at the cabin for 3 days that trip, just enjoying each other's company without the demands of ranch work or family obligations. They talked about the past and the future, about their pride in their children and their hopes for grandchildren. They made love like they had when they were young, with passion and tenderness and deep, abiding joy in each other. When they finally rode back to the ranch, they found John and Emma had managed everything perfectly in their absence, and Sam was excited to tell them about a sick horse he had helped nurse back to health. The house was full of noise and life, and Isaiah and Catherine stood in their doorway holding hands, looking at the chaos with nothing but love. The years that followed brought grandchildren, 5 in total, who filled the ranch with laughter and mischief. Isaiah taught them to work leather and rope cattle, while Catherine taught them to ride and train horses. The family gathered every Sunday for dinner, and the long table Isaiah had built years ago was crowded with family, multiple generations sharing food and stories. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered to celebrate. John gave a speech about his parents' love and dedication, bringing everyone to tears. Emma presented them with a beautiful photo album she had compiled, full of images from their life together. Sam, now a successful veterinarian with his own practice in town, gifted them a trip to California, a chance to see the ocean. Isaiah and Catherine took that trip the following spring, traveling by train to San Diego. It was the first time either of them had seen the ocean, and they stood on the beach holding hands, watching the waves crash against the shore. The water was so different from their desert home, vast and powerful and mysterious. It's beautiful, Katherine said, but I miss our mountains. Me too, Isaiah agreed, but I'm glad we came. Glad we got to see something new together. They stayed in California for 2 weeks, exploring and experiencing things they had never imagined in their ranch life. But they were both grateful to return home, to their land and their family and the life they had built. The desert had its own beauty, harsh and unforgiving, but also breathtaking in its austerity. The sunsets were more brilliant than anything they had seen in California, the stars brighter in the clear desert air. This was their place, and they loved it with a fierce, possessive love. As they grew older, Isaiah and Katherine gradually let their children take over more of the ranch work, though neither of them ever fully retired. They were still checking on cattle and training horses well into their 60s, too in love with the work to fully stop. But they also made time for leisure, for rides out to their cabin, for afternoons spent just sitting together reading or talking. One evening, when Isaiah was 67 and Katherine 64, they were in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling. It was spring again, the season when new life seemed to burst forth from every corner of the ranch. The mare was restless, pacing her stall, and Katherine recognized the signs. She's going to foal tonight, she told Isaiah. He nodded, settling onto a bale of hay to keep watch. Feels familiar, doesn't it? Katherine smiled, understanding what he meant. That was 42 years ago. Hard to believe. Not really, Isaiah said. Feels like yesterday sometimes. I can still see you exactly as you were that night, covered in blood and exhausted but refusing to give up. And I can see you, Katherine said, sitting beside him. Walking into that barn like salvation. I fell in love with you that night, even though I didn't realize it until later. I knew the first time I saw you in town, Isaiah said. Took me months to work up the courage to do something about it, though. They kept watch together as the hours passed, and just after midnight, the mare laid down and began to push. The birth was quick and easy, a healthy colt slipping into the world with minimal fuss. Isaiah and Katherine watched the mare lick her baby clean, watched the colt struggle to its feet on impossibly long, wobbly legs. Still a miracle, Katherine said softly. Doesn't matter how many times you see it. Still a miracle, Isaiah agreed, taking her hand. They walked back to the house in the moonlight, both moving slower than they used to, but still strong, still healthy. Inside, they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of decades. Isaiah brushed out Katherine's hair, now more silver than brown, and she helped him with the buttons on his shirt that his arthritic fingers sometimes struggled with. They lay in bed holding each other, and Isaiah kissed Katherine's forehead, her cheek, her lips. I love you more now than I did 42 years ago, he said. I didn't think that was possible, but it is. I know, Katherine said. Love grows if you tend it properly. We've always been good at tending things. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, content and at peace. The years continued their steady march forward. Isaiah and Katherine celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The ranch was thriving under John's management, with Emma running a successful horse operation and Sam's veterinary practice serving ranches across the county. The family that had started with 2 people working through a long, difficult night had grown into something strong and enduring. Isaiah and Katherine spent their later years, much as they had spent their middle years, working when they felt able, resting when they needed to, always together. They still rode out to their cabin several times a year, treasuring the quiet and privacy. They still held hands on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over their land. When Isaiah was 73, he had a mild heart attack that scared them all. Katherine sat by his hospital bed in Casa Grande, holding his hand and refusing to leave, even when the nurses insisted visiting hours were over. Isaiah recovered, but it was a reminder that their time together was not infinite, that every day was a gift. They became even more intentional about cherishing each moment after that. They said, I love you multiple times a day. They never went to bed angry after a disagreement. They made sure to touch each other often, small caresses and kisses that maintained the physical connection that had always been important to them. Catherine's health remained good until she was 72, when she developed a persistent cough that turned into pneumonia. Isaiah stayed with her constantly as she recovered, reading to her, bringing her water and medicine, lying beside her in bed just to be close. The sickness passed, but like Isaiah's heart attack, it served as a reminder. "We've had a good life," Catherine said one evening as they sat on their porch, both of them wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night. "The best," Isaiah agreed. "I wouldn't change anything," Catherine said. "Not one moment. Not even the parts where we argued about whose turn it was to muck out the stalls," Isaiah teased. Catherine laughed, the sound a bit raspy, but still full of joy. "Not even those parts. Although you were definitely wrong more often than I was." "If you say so, dear," Isaiah said, squeezing her hand. They sat together as the stars came out, countless and brilliant in the dark desert sky. The same stars that had shone on them that first night in the barn, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding and the births of their children, and every important moment of their lives together. Isaiah and Katherine Vaughn continued on for several more years, growing frailer but still together, still in love. They lived to see their youngest grandchild graduate from school, to meet 4 great-grandchildren, to celebrate 55 years of marriage. They were fixtures in Casa Grande, respected and loved, their story of how they met becoming local legend. The ranch they had built together spanned over 1,000 acres now, a testament to their hard work and careful management. The Vaughn name was synonymous with quality livestock and fair dealing. Their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy, raising cattle and horses with the same dedication and love that Isaiah and Catherine had shown. And every spring, when the desert bloomed and new calves were born, the family remembered that first night when everything began. When Catherine had been alone and desperate in a barn with a cow that might not survive, and Isaiah had ridden up and changed both their lives forever. When 2 people had worked through the night to save a cow and her calf, and in the process had found each other. It was a story of persistence and dedication, of skillful hands and patient hearts. But mostly, it was a love story, one that had grown from a single night of crisis into a lifetime of partnership, respect, and devotion. It was the kind of love that built families and ranches and legacies, the kind of love that people wrote songs about and told stories about for generations. Isaiah and Katherine Vaughn had found each other in the Wild West of 1883 Arizona, in a barn lit against the darkness, working to bring new life into the world. And from that beginning, they had built something remarkable, something lasting, something true. Their love had weathered heat and drought, hardship and loss, but it had never wavered. It had only grown stronger, deeper, more essential with every passing year. And when they were very old, sitting on their porch, holding hands as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun paint the desert in gold and crimson, they both knew that the night Isaiah had seen Catherine's barn lit up and decided to stop had been the most important decision of their lives. It had been the moment when everything changed, when 2 separate paths merged into one, when a struggling rancher and a wandering cowboy found the home they had both been seeking in each other. That was love in the Wild West. Not always easy, never simple, but always worth fighting for. Always worth holding on to with both hands and refusing to let go. Always worth working through the night to save.